Okay, guys, so we're really happy to be joined by Dr. Shawn Pruchnicki of Ohio State University. So we are the Yale Student UFO Society. My name is Shri. So the goal of this organization is to kind of promote academic involvement in the subject of UAP. So yeah, Shawn is part of an organization called AIAA UAP. It's run within the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. It's a UAP is unidentified anomalous phenomenon. It's kind of another way of saying UFO for more official kind of policy circles. So we've had a couple of events, great events so far with AIAA UAP. One, their chair Ryan Graves came on campus for an in-person event like a month ago, and Rex Groves, the chair of their hardware factors team, told us a lot about detection systems and hardware systems that are used in the UAP domain and kind of the thought leadership that's required and how they're interfacing with government, different regulations, and all sorts of aspects of this. And Shawn is going to tell us about like an alternate aspect of this. So like there's hardware factors, which is like radar system, um, detection systems, kind of like, and then there's human factors, which is kind of collecting event reporting and how do we deal with flight safety issues and how is the human involved? It's not just some blobs in the sky that are detecting. There's actual humans involved. Um, so this is we're really happy to be joined by Shawn and kind of telling us what their organization is up to in this domain. So we'll give it up to Shawn then.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. First, let me ask, I'm using PowerPoint in a different way than I normally have. So can you just see my slide and that's it? Is that correct?
We just see your slide right now.
Okay. All right. You can't see the notes and all that stuff. All right. I've never actually ever used the notes before. So I have two totally different. I just want to make sure I share the right one. So thank you very much for having me. I was very excited when Ryan got a hold of me and said that there'd be an opportunity to do this. What what we want to talk about is I'm the chair of the Human Factors Committee for this group, and a significant part of this entire phenomena, or this as this is examined by many different agencies and our group as well, is considering flight safety. And this is where human factors comes in, and we'll talk a lot more about this and about event reporting to capture the data. And our group has been tasked with looking at just those two concepts primarily, but there's some other things that we're doing that we can either talk about later or at another time. The Okay, see here. So that didn't advance. There we go. So there's our agenda. Background, we'll talk about some theory for change, our approach to it. I want to give you an example of a firsthand witness account. We did a study where we gathered some information, and I want to give you just a little bit of a snippet of a quite remarkable firsthand account of a air crew member on a military KC-135, which is a refueling airplane, if you were not aware. So the case analysis, and then of course we're going to talk about reporting programs and a summary and a future research. If you have any questions as we go, I want this to be a discussion as opposed to me just lecturing for 45 minutes or an hour and then you having questions in. So please feel free to jump in and think of this as we're all sitting at a big round table and talking about these things. So I just wanted to, the only reason I do this is just to give you a real quick of my past is because I want you to understand as I discuss these topics where I'm coming from as far as my perspectives and my understanding of some of these events. So based on my background, what I'm able to bring to our committee and how I look at these events and analyze them and so forth. So here at Ohio State, which is where I am, where I'm a professor, I have a Ph.D. in cognitive engineering here from OSU with Dave Woods as my advisor. A master's degree in aeronautical science, human factors. I was a professional pilot. I flew for 10 years for one of the Delta Connection carriers, most of that time as a captain. I am an accident investigator, was with the Airline Pilots Association at my airline, where I did 5 air carrier major accidents, investigated over 200 incidents. I still investigate accidents in a private practice. During my time at 10 years, I was very involved with a lot of different agencies, working with them on various national airspace system events or problems, FAA, CAMI, NTSB, NASA, MITRE, so forth. I actually ended up working at NASA in the Human Factors Division for many, many years out at the Ames Research Facility. I have a consulting company that's very busy. Accident investigation, litigation, subject matter expert stuff. And I happen to be a senior research fellow at the University of Johannesburg in South Africa. So I come from a couple different directions. Professional pilot, done a lot of industry work, helped write a lot of regulations, advisory circulars, helped do some of the work in redesigning our national airspace system and so forth. I think is probably the most important part out of all that. So this part of the UAP concern emerged several years ago, where everyone started realizing that really the primary problem that in the area where everyone is basically focusing is that whatever these are, really are a potential safety of flight hazard because we have reports of commercial air carrier pilots maneuvering their aircraft around, sometimes rather swiftly, sometimes rather briskly, because they think they're in possibly an imminent collision with some of these. So that and other examples that it starts becoming where we're starting to realize that this is a safety hazard. And then, of course, a national security concern because we don't know what these are. And a lot of leading experts feel that they are security related. In other words, they are intelligence, reconnaissance data vehicles from other countries and so forth. And obviously that's, being challenged because of the potential or, the performance that's seen out of these vehicles. Is it really possible and so forth? So, we're not here to try to prove that. Yeah. And then, of course, there's the third explanation, right? Is it extraterrestrial, so forth? And we're certainly not here to prove that. It would obviously be very exciting if that were the case, that someday that's what's figured out. But that's not what we're interested in. We're interested in the flight safety, hazards. That's our primary goal right now, and then national security concern. So here's the problem that UAP safety events where pilots have to do this, both civilian air carrier, private pilots flying their own small airplanes for fun, and certainly military, they're tremendously underreported. And we're going to talk about why that is. So we're only really seeing the tip of the iceberg of these events. And we have a very limited understanding because of that of how these UAPs really affect our aerospace operation and how not only that, but also how it affects the individuals afterwards. There's we really believe, and we've been told this by so many individuals that have had events that there's such a stigma associated with reporting these. Now, reporting is getting better because that stigma is really starting to peel away. But for the majority of time, except for the last couple years, both commercial crews and certainly military, if you had one of these experiences, you were basically told to shut up and not tell anyone, right? Because there was the psychological component to it. That if you did, certainly in the military, if you reported it, there was concern that there could be a psychological problem with you and you might lose your medical. So you might get pulled from flight status. And commercial pilots felt the same way. What we saw is what we saw. Let's just keep our mouth shut and so forth. So these things never were reported. Now, in the last year or so, that stigma is slowly starting to peel off, and people, including air traffic controllers, are talking to pilots. They're seeing strange things on their radar and asking pilots, do you see something out there? So controllers, pilots, military are now feeling comfortable, more comfortable coming forward. But the stigma is still a little bit there. So we need to change. There's a lot of things that need to change. And our group has been involved with AIAA and also with a research organization in Washington called MITRE. Some of you may or may not be familiar with them. And the purpose is to find, in this case, I'm going to talk about, a firsthand account of a UAP observation and analyze that report with respect to some reporting guidance that we've come up with that we're going to talk about here. And we're going to see how that event kind of fits into this framework. And what's important for you is to think about, as we talk about this framework that we've come up with, what you think should be in there. What do you think should be captured in a report? Because these reports are like nothing that we've reported before, right? Not like our normal aviation safety type reports that we've been collecting for a very long time. This is obviously quite different. So the reports and the gathering tools are going to look different. So as I go through this, think to yourself about what should be on the report. And we're going to talk about here, starting with the next slide, about ideas that we have. Let's see here. I think we've covered everything. There we go. So this framework, this idea that we have, covers all these areas. And I'm not going to read each one because each slide following covers each one of these. But for example, trying to determine what level hazard was it? Was this something, we have reports where this is something where pilots felt that they saw, 25, 50 miles away. It was just very unusual and they want to report it. And we know of reports where pilots felt that collision was imminent, something coming right at them, either directly or from the side, and they felt like they had to maneuver the airliner out of the way or they would have been struck. So determining the level of the hazard, what really is the workplace stigma, and this really feeds in to the safety culture idea, which I'm not sure how this group is familiar with safety culture, but how in a very short, you could teach a whole class on safety culture, how safety culture, uh, the part that we're talking about here is how comfortable someone is coming forward, giving a report and not being ridiculed or punished or something like that. That's what we're talking about here. And then we have to get the data out there, right? Data for numerous groups to be able to use it and study it and trying to find some meaning behind it. So in the bottom of the slide there, a centralized national scientific data collection is certainly necessary, like we have with aviation. In fact, there's a couple places you can go for that, and we'll talk about that. Let's see here if I missed anything. I believe I covered everything in my notes. I also want to mention, I know I just briefly said it, but it really deserves saying again, is the individual that reports it, that actually sees it. A lot of these folks have psychological ramifications from witnessing these things, and this is not to be underestimated. There are some people that do not, um, that appear to have no problem at all. And there are some people that are deeply affected by these things. And what's important is that we recognize that as an industry, and that to make sure that these aviators, these individuals get the help that they need, the counseling they need without ridicule. That is all part of that stigma. So I'm not sure if you folks were aware that does happen. So this witness account, this was the firsthand account, and it was on a KC-135. This was in 96. They were out refueling B-1 bombers, and the commander actually warned the crew about reporting risk. So they had finished their post I apologize. I'm going to be looking down here, kind of my notes to make. I want to make sure I get the story right. They the individual was the boom operator, right? So he's in the back of the airplane operating the boom, the refuel. He finishes his checklist, comes back up to the flight deck, and he was sitting in the jump seat, which is the seat between the pilots, um, just so he could get a better view out the window and just talk to the pilots. And there was a really nice aurora borealis out in front of him. And then a few minutes later, the entire glare shield lit up by something that was just right above them. Um, Everyone leaned forward to try to see what that was. And at first, they thought it was a meteor. And as an airline pilot, I've seen a few meteors. I've never had them close enough to light up my flight deck, but I have heard of this happening. And they thought that's what it was. And they all were looking up, expecting to see this, but the it did not have what and also rocket parts too. When rockets are shot up and the parts that fall back and burn up on reentry, those look a lot like meteors as well. So they were thinking it was some of that space debris, but there wasn't a tail behind it. So right a meteor or rocket parts floating in and burning up, you're going to have that characteristic fire tail right after it. This was re-entering very quickly, but had no such tail. So that didn't make sense. It was spherical, it was a glowing bright white light. Um, and instead of continuing to accelerate, it's, let's see here. It began to slow down and just all of a sudden stop in what appeared to be up at the top of the Aurora Borealis, excuse me. And what was really remarkable about this, now think about this. You're watching this, you're looking at the window. It was so bright it lit up your flight deck, and then it stops out there, and it appears to be at the top of the Aurora Borealis. So you're trying to figure out the altitude of that, which is very high, right? And then it starts to move, and all the flight crew said it left like wake turbulence through the top of the Aurora. So you could see where it was like splitting the top of the aurora, just like it would if an aircraft, when you see airplanes fly right through the top of the clouds, if you're just in the top, it like wake on a lake as a boat goes through, right? It leaves basically wake turbulence in the water. They said they saw it do that in the aurora. So they really lead you to believe that something really was up there that was pushing through the ionized gas up there. So everybody was stunned at this point. Everyone came up with theories and ideas. They were talking that a very long flight ahead of them. And then the gentleman we interviewed asked the rest of the crew, asked the commander, do we report this? And the entire crew said, absolutely not. Keep your mouth shut. There are stories like this that have been passed down. You do not report this to anyone. This could affect your flight status. This is our little secret. What happened in this cockpit stays in this cockpit. And that's how it was treated. And this individual actually lives in the Dayton area. I'm in Columbus. And many years later, had a UAP sighting over at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. He lived very close to the base, being still in the military, which is kind of interesting because the Wright-Patterson area, as many of you probably know, has a high concentration of UAPs. And Wright-Patterson has a history, as you probably also know, of supposedly having UAP vehicles secretly hidden away. Some conspiracy theorists feel that. I'm not sure if it's true, but it definitely does have a fairly high incidence of UAP reportings. And he was someone that actually saw that. So this is why things are underreported. These are some of the reasons. The biggest reason is we don't really have a centralized place to report. So in this case analysis, the first thing, looking at hazard determination, right? There was no data from radar, other aircraft, large distance, there was no hazard. When we looked in the narrative, we weren't able to find, there was this missing details from where this person finally wrote this out. The, you know, we would, so we need that information in the reports. And we also, when these things happen, we need to be able to make sure that the aviators are sticking, just like any other situation, to the basics of flight that we're all taught and we carry with us all the way to the airlines, that no matter what happens, we always fly the airplane first, and then we always take care of navigation, and then we always communicate. In that order, aviate, navigate, communicate is what we're always taught from day one as pilots. So we already talked about the stigma, and there was no follow-up, which is important because usually with any traumatic event or serious event, like in my accident investigations that I've done in the past and still do, you need to talk to people a couple of times. You get the first interview, and then you go back and get a second interview because as people think, they remember things that they forgot to tell you the first time. If it was a flight safety hazard, we wonder, would they have been more likely to report it? And of course, the problem is, how do you define flight safety hazard? And that's an important question because when we finally do get a single place, and there are other places we'll talk about, is that the only kind of data we're going to see? Are we only going to see, is it going to skew the data? Are we only going to see when it's a hazard and we're not going to hear about, as much all the other times when it's not a hazard? It's best that people, just like we do in the airlines in my safety work when I was there, in the reports that we receive for safety problems, is that when they observe something like this, they report it as soon as possible. And we have in people that deal with this, that are going to deal with this, I should say, need to be able to know the environment, the appearance, and the behavior of the UAP. And the reason is we're looking for patterns, right? Everyone that's involved in this is looking for patterns. And Rex might have mentioned that when he spoke, talking about things that are detected with all the different really cool gadgets that he has. I always love when we do our senior staff calls. I don't understand what Rex is talking about half the time, but he has some definitely really cool tools, and hear him talk about all the capabilities. And part of what that does is being able to recognize patterns. And it's the same thing with reporting. We do it in aviation, we do it in aviation safety, and we need to do that same thing here with reporting. And of course, we already mentioned this is why they're underreported. So these events are so poorly understood. That's basically the biggest reason why we still don't know. I mean, all of you have taken such a great interest in this, but can anyone that's on the call really come out with a good explanation? My guess is no. And if you do have a very good explanation, I want to talk to you. And there's people at the Department of Defense that want to talk to you because they can't figure it out either. So the last one here is about improving safety culture. That all feeds into 2 points. Well, first, as I said earlier, safety culture, extremely large topic. It's something that I go and lecture all around the world, and companies hire me to come in, not just aviation, hire me to come in and help them improve their safety culture. So it's a very big topic. But for this discussion, the parts of a safety culture that are important is that removing the stigma so that people feel comfortable to report. So reporting and removing the stigma so they're comfortable talking about it are really the 2 things that we need to talk about. And then this is the other one that I mentioned, well-being and health. There are those potential consequences. And we've heard stories that are very concerning, very concerning. I've actually heard of stories that people, aircrew, have said that when they've had UAPs very close to their aircraft, They are, they feel different sensation wise, that sometimes they feel like all of a sudden very relaxed, at peace. They just feel very different mentally. I've heard of a couple stories where like both crew members felt that way. So that's extremely interesting to hear about, right? So if that is happening at any amount, these are things we need to hear about. On the backside of that, that's obviously can be very concerning if that happens to you. And then again, there's some people for various reasons. Doesn't mean that anyone's tougher than anyone else. It's various reasons. Someone else might not have a problem at all. But we need to be there for those that need it. This is the crux of the whole problem. This is why all of you, I'm assuming, all of us, um, my committee, Human Factors, AIAA, Department of Defense, folks in the military, or at least as far as we know, folks in the military, why we do not have a corpus of data that we can study and look for these patterns and try to understand what's going on with these is because we do not have a centralized national scientific data collection. We need to pile all of these into one place like we do with aviation. We need these narratives. And the one thing that's different about this, and this is really important and something that you guys need to think about, is that with the aviation reports, they're essentially always anonymous. We never worry about their names. Now, in the airlines, if we feel like we need a second interview, if it's something pretty serious and we need some more information to better the investigation, not punitive, just, hey, these 3 or 4 questions weren't discussed. And for us to understand what happened to this crew, we really need these, questions answered. We can get the names and numbers from the gatekeeper, as it's called, the person that does know, the one person does know, and we can call the crew, and it's always the union representative, safety representative that does that. So, but for something like this, we envision that the person that's filling out the form can select anonymous, or it's okay to to contact me for more information, so they get a choice. And we would love those people that select it, you're free to contact me, then we can do that. And these details that we receive, the last point is that hopefully hopefully as this progresses, that it would kind of basically steer itself a little bit, help define different categories for future reporting. It was the same way with the ASRS program, Aviation Safety Reporting Program out at NASA Ames. It's the same way with NTSB. As time goes on, these reporting programs, keep in mind, they morph, they change a little bit. So they start with, okay, this is what we need to capture. And then after a year or so, they start changing. They're going, well, people are starting to add these other little tidbits. We need to create a category for that, right? So they change over time. And there's no reason why. I mean, this should be the same way. That's normal. So filling out a UAP report, where would you do this? Now, right now, there are several websites, and I'm sure you folks probably know which ones they are out there. Some of them have been created by individuals. Um, some of them have been created by, specific safety groups out there to analyze the events. Some of them you have access to the data. A lot of them it's behind a paywall. Um, the problem is the majority of them, there's no scientific balance or design to them or so forth. So you have to be very skeptical, using some of these things. What's interesting is, and I just found this a couple days ago. I looked in the air traffic controller's handbook. It's called the 7110. 7110 is the number for the FAA document. It's huge. It's like 1,500 pages. It's called the 7110. We always look at it in accident investigation. So I took a look in there just to see, and sure enough, it says in there, I searched the PDF for UAP, and it says if you want, it talks about UAPs, and it says if you want to report one, go here to the National UFO Reporting Center. And I went and looked at it, and I don't know. I'm kind of on the fence, but here's the problem. Here's the point that I want to make to everyone, that I want everyone to walk away with. This one repository, these ideas that we have, our committee, as we're trying to put together, who should run this? And what should that organization look like that would be capable of doing this? For example, it's an organization that obviously has to understand aviation, right? You wouldn't want to pick a third party that has no knowledge and understanding whatsoever of aviation. Obviously, a group that can manage large volumes of data and has that ability to scientifically analyze it. It'd be great if they were already financially supported by the government and they're willing to share that information via the internet for free. I mean, that would be the dream way to do it, right? Well, to make something like that work, right? Especially with something like this that has a stigma associated with it, and it's still a pretty hefty stigma. To make a program, a self-reporting program, like the one we have in aviation called an ASAP program. That's the crown jewel, an ASAP program. There's a couple other smaller ones, but ASAP is the one. And it's pretty much, I don't want to say solely, but extremely significant in reducing the accident rate in the United States back 25 so years when we started ASAP programs. There's a significant decrease in accidents. We discovered these things, and we feel that it's the same things that are applicable to this type of reporting. It's absolutely no different. And I used to work on an ASAP committee. So I read the reports and I helped run an ASAP committee for my airline. So I'm very familiar with these concepts and these problems and how these have to be managed. Because not only did I help run the program, and these are things I had to deal with to make sure that these were fine or our program wouldn't operate properly, but I also read with the team, all of the reports that came through that pilots were submitting. Trust is the number one. And that fits in perfectly with UAPs because of the stigma. You have to have that trust that your information's protected. If the person selects anonymous, that it truly is anonymous, and that there's not going to be any ridicule. No one's going to, call them and tease them or anything. You have to have the trust, because once you blow the trust, your program will fall apart. And that's happened to airlines before, where ASAP program, somehow it leaked out about someone's event they reported, and nothing spreads like wildfire through a pilot group, like a trust being broken for a reporting program. It doesn't take long for it to get through a 5,000 pilot rank, and everyone stops reporting then. You have to have independence. This is something we see with companies, but it's something that still applies here in ease of reporting, right? Nobody wants to sit down and fill out a 20-page document after you've been out flying on a 5-day trip and you just want to go home. So it needs to be something that's online, gathers valuable data that we all need, like you guys need and we need and other folks need, that want to search this database, but it has to be manageable and reasonable, that a person would not get started and just finally say, I'm not filling the rest of this out, or would just say, I filled one of those out before and it was so difficult to use and it was such a pain, I'm not doing anymore. That has messed up a lot of safety reporting programs. something saying acknowledging, thank you for the report. That's very important. We learned that the hard way in ASAP programs in the beginning, and something to motivate them. We need to promote the program throughout the groups that you're trying to get to use them, and be willing to take some feedback for those groups. Here's the great news. We already have it. It's the NASA ASRS system, Aviation Safety Aviation Safety Reporting Program or system. I'm sorry. Everything that I listed on the other side, this already exists. It's a joint program. I'm not sure if anyone here is familiar how aviation centric any of you are per se, but just very quickly, it's a joint project between the FAA and NASA. It happened it was created by the time it was done. It was after an accident in 74. So it was somewhere before 80. And it was a 727 actually that left Columbus, here where I am, where I live, going to Dulles and struck the top of a mountain, shooting the VOR approach for runway 12. And well, it says there 1976 is when it started. And what happened was United Airlines came forward and said, we almost did the same thing 3 weeks ago. But our crews figured it out the last second and pulled up and missed it. And that's when the FAA came forward and said, it would have been nice if we could have shared that data, or if United could have shared that data with everyone that flies, to say, hey, this is kind of tricky. This approach is a little bit tricky. You need to watch out for this. So that's why they created this. And it has all these features that we've just been talking about that I won't go through again. And you're protected. So even if in this case, it's a safety, and it's also, you can confess your sins, right? If you accidentally break a rule, if you accidentally break an altitude or something, all inadvertent errors, you can report those and you're protected. They're not going to come after you like they used to. So there, I couldn't get my slide to go. So NASA was chosen as an independent third party because it was felt, and the FAA was the one that came up with this idea. They recognized that no one's going to trust us with this data. Pilots aren't going to trust us because the FAA has been so hard on them prior to that. So they said, well, we'll have NASA run it. And NASA still runs it to this day. And they de-identify the reports, they put it in a searchable database, and you can go online and you can search that database and find all types of safety issues. It's a great database. You can go in and just select one parameter and it'll all kinds of things. And you're protected from doing that. Now, let me just caution you one thing, because some of you are probably going to go in there and poke around and look for things. You're not actually seeing the whole database. There's very few people that know this, that understand this. You're not actually seeing the whole database. You're seeing right now, last time I talked to them last month, you're seeing about 8% of the database. And I won't go into all the reasons why that is. But if you're ever doing research and you need access to the full database, if you contact them, they will do a search for you for whatever parameters you set up. So just keep that in mind should you go in there and start poking around for like drones and so forth, which they do track. And that's the problem. When they do get a few UAP reports right now, and they do get some, if you word search UAPs, you'll find some in there. There's not many. They classify them in their system as drones because they don't have any way of determining, was it a drone? Was it really a UAP? And they're not set up to deal with UAPs right now. So they just make everything a drone. So that the database right now that they have is not configured to deal with this, is the problem. Now, I won't really go through this slide. This was just showing how the two different groups work, which basically I already covered. I tend to get a slide ahead of myself. Actually, I already said that too. Okay, so what about the ASRS? Well, we've talked to them. I know the director and Becky Huey, and I've talked to Becky several times, and they are very interested in tracking UAPs. They would like a separate category, and they would like to be able to put themselves out there and say, will you report these? Now, the form they have right now that they've always used or used for a long time for aviation safety, the problem is that form doesn't quite fit very well for reporting UAPs. Remember all the stuff I talked about earlier? It needs different boxes and stuff, and some other boxes removed. So the form would have to be altered. So that's going to take some work. And then they would need to promote it. And here's the biggest problem that Becky and I have talked about, and she's explained to me, is money. Because she says, they're operating on a shoestring budget and, of course, understaffed and everything that's typical. And if she does all that and gets absolutely flooded with UAP reports, they have no staff to deal with all this in the database, to manage this huge flow of data. So it's been explained to me and she's been trying to get some money allocated from the government to start capturing UAP data. There's not a way to do it right now to alter the form with our help. And we've been talking to her about, hey, we're ready to help you. We're ready to help change the form for like a UAP only reporting form. And that's the problem. Is she goes, I need some more people. I need some money to be able to deal with in case we get hit with lots of them because we're going to promote it. We're going to promote it all the airlines throughout the military. And, so then that information's in there. Now we all have access to a certain a degree, like I said, around 8-9%, and we can get access to more. To kind of wrap all that up to allow some time for discussion, this stigma and this fear of these UAP events is completely contradictory to all of the aerospace safety principles that we have. Goes in complete direction. These types of events and the potential hazard that they present is basically same in almost all ways to what we were dealing with before we developed traffic collision and avoidance software, TCAS, many, many years ago. We were worried about airplanes getting too close to airplanes. And this software was developed to, help prevent that from happening and preventing mid-air collisions. In a lot of ways, I see it as being similar. We already talked about the second point. This is extremely important to understand to people that if you need some help, that's fine. Here's some people you can talk to, so forth. They can help with that, any types of problems that you're having with it, occupational health experts. And on our group, our human factors group at AIAA, we actually have a physician who has a lot of interest in this area, not a qualified social worker or counselor, but he is very interested in this area and provides a lot of data to our group and a lot of information about what would be involved with this. So, Dave, it's very, very, very helpful. And then, of course, like we've talked about, right? We need a standard reporting format and a centralized reporting location to improve the safety responses during the event. What should you do? How do you handle this as it's going on? And then how do we handle it afterwards? As far as the future goes, and this is the last slide I have, is how aerospace personnel respond. What are the different views different agencies have on UAP reporting? Certainly the government's been a lot more interested in it. I think you're all aware of that. Certainly Ryan testified to the Senate a while back. And we've all heard about Shawn Pruchnicki and that office and so forth. And then, of course, how these events impact professional and personal well-being. The final thing that I'll leave you with, and we'll open it up for questions, is that think about one of the things that concerns me the most is think about busy airspace like the Northeast Corridor around JFK, Washington, and so forth. It is very, very crowded. I flew a lot when I was flying commercially. I flew in that area a lot. And you are really packed in tightly with minimum separation, the bare minimum separation. And I really worry about a crew that sees a UAP and feels that a collision is imminent and tries to turn away from, or I should say, does turn away from what they're perceiving as a potential collision, and now puts themselves in danger to possibly collide with another aircraft. And then that sets off the warning equipment, and now both airplanes are now deviating. And so it's kind of that chain reaction kind of situation. So that's another aspect of the safety, is not only with just the aircraft itself moving abruptly and possibly people getting hurt in the back that could be walking around, but also just maneuvering abruptly in really crowded airspace is something that I think about as a former airline pilot. So we will end that there. Let's see here if I can figure out how to make my slide large, or how to make myself large. Okay, we will go ahead and open it up for questions. No, I can't see. No, I guess I'll just keep myself small. Oh, no, stop sharing.
Cool. Yeah, thanks so much, Sean.
Yeah.
So let's open it up for questions. I'll start with a question, and then, but anyone else, feel free to like raise your hand or like virtually raise your hand or just chime in if there's like a free like space of time. So I guess the first question is that nowadays it's like kind of there's a lot of uncertainty in cuts as far as air traffic control. Like there's the cuts to air traffic control and all these like safety of flight incidents going on all over the country. So institutions kind of seem stretched and dealing with a lot of issues. Like, and you were also mentioning that ASRS doesn't really have the time and resources to make a new form and promote event reporting. So how does your organization feel that like all public institutions are kind of under the stress, or are there like avenues that are like, are there some organizations that have bandwidth to deal with it, that are dealing with it in a way that you're working with, or anything like that?
The only no is the big answer. However, I mentioned MITRE earlier, and they do mostly FAA research. They're a research organization, and they do a ton of FAA work, and they also do some Department of Defense work. And they just finished at the end of the year a research project. The FAA asked them to look into UAP reports and potential flight safety problems. So as far as privately, no, but I wanted to mention to everyone, because I think I forgot to mention, is that the FAA is taking this seriously. I mean, they actually came up with research money and had this research group, a very prestigious research group, and said, we need to start looking into this. And we actually shared with them some of the interview information we had, and we collaborated with them. So privately, no, but there are things like that that's going on that is looking into these events, but they're not collecting them from outside sources, from the reporters. There's just these reports that are already out there and being looked at sometimes by some of these other agencies, but not one that's collecting data other than those other places that I mentioned, those private individuals or independent safety groups. And several of those I saw when I went and looked at most of them. Several of those were behind a paywall. So you had, I didn't look to see how much, but you have to pay something to get into their database and poke around. So that doesn't help anyone.
I see. And on that note, so there are kind of private organizations like Ryan's organization, Americans for Safe Aerospace, and like this National
It,
UFO Center.
yes.
Like as far as like um, these like third-party agencies, like which ones have kind of been useful as far as getting data, like, and or which ones, or I don't want to have you badmouth any, but
You
like,
know, to
the,
take
is the
well, to
data?
tell you the truth, I really don't know the answer to that, and it's not because I'm avoiding a tough question. I just have never gone and messed with them, um, because I know that from listening to discussions by some of the other senior leadership, I know that some of them are very skeptical and some of them are just flat out bad. So I've just never taken the time to go and see for myself and try to figure out which ones are reasonable and which ones are, you know, not are very, definitely not scientifically designed at all. Um, so I've just never researched that for myself and made a list. I just noticed when I popped on four of them, uh, I think it was two of them were behind a paywall, and then the other two, I clicked on database and it came up and just talked about the database. Um, but I didn't sit there and start searching or anything because here's the problem. A lot there are numerous, I know because we've talked about it in meetings and Ryan's talked about it and Rex has talked about it, is that there are numerous databases out there that are centered around UAPs all being extraterrestrial. And that's the problem, is that these are not scientifically focused on standing back and saying, okay, what are all the options this could be? These are people that have kind of already made up their mind and said, well, these are, what's the saying, little green men or whatever. And these are the different, it's three categories or something of UFO shapes. And, so they are those types of websites. So not scientific at all. They've already made up their mind before they've collected the data. Um, and the rest of us that are doing this type of work, especially those of us, or like Maya, that are doing work for the FAA, we're taking a scientific approach. We're not trying to find little green men. We're trying to figure out what these are and how they affect flight safety, detection, like Rex talked about, and trying to figure out what these are and if they're dangerous. If they, are they from foreign adversaries? Are they spy type things? Um, maybe there's a chance. Well, I don't know what the percentage would be, something low, but maybe there's a chance they are extraterrestrial. That would be really cool, in my opinion. I think most of us would think that's really cool if that's ever figured out. But that's not really foremost in any of our minds that do this type of work. My group is concerned about an airplane running into one of these things, whatever it is, and the health of the air crew and how can we collect data. And our group has a lot of experience in collecting safety data. That's where we're trying to contribute, is when we can find a group that's willing to build a national database, we have some ideas already built. We already have it laid out, what we think is a really good start.
Thanks. Does anyone have any questions that they want to jump in? Yep, go for it, Solana.
Yeah, yeah, Silvano Colombano. I am a little bit worried in that I understand that the focus on safety is the most obvious something we can get our hands on, but that doesn't really cover a full range of data that might be gotten. That would, I mean, for instance, if something is very far, then it's inherently not a threat to the aircraft. So who cares whether it's zigzagging or doing something really strange? So, so I see that there could be something lacking if we really do not have a more complete the descriptions in terms of categories and behavior that might not even be potentially threatening to the aircraft.
It's
So how do you solve that?
it's I thought it was on one of the slides, and I'm sorry, I might have missed the bullet point. No, we believe that that should go on the report, and that was one of the points I was trying to make, that that's not on the ASRS reports, the current report, and that's one of the changes that would need to be made, that it needs to be added. Just like the boom operator, you know, that had certain characteristics, color, movement, that very unique feature that it appeared to have wake in the top of the Aurora. Those are all things that we need to know as well. So that's why the current form is really nowhere near, only about half of it. You know, when I looked through it and tore it apart, and I have filled several of those forms out myself as a pilot over the years, when I looked through it, I thought about half of it we could probably lose and add great points like you just made, because we do need those characteristics. So I apologize if I missed that as a bullet point on one of those slides, but
A second, sorry. Okay, thank you.
thank you, sir. Great question, or great point.
Any other questions? I have a few, but feel free to jump in. Cool. So to what extent are the FAA repositories public? And what levels, like as far as like raw data and radar tracks? Because there's like a famous case from Stephenville, Texas that Shawn is definitely aware of, but there was like a bunch of people that saw some craft, and they even have like the radar data from this. It was about like 15, 20 years ago. Like they released some tracks kind of confirming that there was some object that these people were seeing on the ground. To what extent are you able to access that information, and to what extent is that even accessible to anyone?
Well, you know, that's a really good point. To tell you the truth, I haven't gone into these sites. I'm just very skeptical because I know there are some landmines with some of those sites, and there are some that are kind of on the border. And at this point, we're using our aviation experience with the ASRS, because that's something that I'm so familiar with, in the ASAP reports that I'm so familiar with, that we're looking at how to craft those, because they, you know, are close to what we already need. Now, there, if you can get into those databases, that will be something that we'll look at out of curiosity. But I would be very, very surprised if they're anything close to what we already have. But, you know, they're certainly worth looking at them. I just haven't gone around and started looking into those databases. And the other part of that is, the reason is, I don't know how valid the data is. You know, when you go in there, and they say this is radar track data, I would really want to know what their sources are. You know, some of these places that you go, they just have that, and it. Now, if it's an FAA site, then that's different, obviously. You know, I obviously feel a lot more comfortable with that. But individuals' websites, you have to be real careful, right? Plus, that was so long ago, that individual one. I have not seen that radar that you've talked about for that event. I certainly heard of it, but have not seen it. Now, it brings up a good point for moving forward. The event that took place 2 years ago, was in 23. Well, the Delta Airlines and the America Airlines going into LAX saw a couple lights. That was a pretty spectacular presentation that both those airplanes saw. And one of our team members who was also an accident investigator, he did what you were talking about because he was able to go back into the live radar website where you can go back in time, and was able to find those flights and watch their position. And he has the timestamp on ATC when they made the report. So then he's got this beautiful investigation for us laid out exactly the position of those airplanes and when they were saying what they were saying. So he was able to plot out, like when the one airplane says, well, it's at our 2 o'clock, and the Delta says, well, it's at our 10 o'clock. So he's able to draw those lines out and say, this is about exactly where the UAP was. So with more recent information, you can actually, kind of build your own investigation because then that data is out there. You're not going to that specific website, but there's other websites that provides valid data that you can use very easily. I mean, he did this and it was like 15 minutes. Now he's a skilled, experienced investigator, but we talked about doing this, and I couldn't believe 15 minutes later it popped up, and I'm looking at this incredible, Google Earth representation of where everyone was, with all the timestamps and air traffic control. So I'm sorry, that's a very long-winded answer to, I guess, a very simple question.
No, that was great. Any other questions? Or else I'll keep going. Yeah, feel free to chime in.
Another comment or question, I'm not sure, but I am worried about everything being called a drone. And it has kind of there are two sides. On one hand, it makes it easier to talk about it because there is less of a stigma to say something is a drone, On the other hand, it already kind of takes away of a number of, frankly, of possibilities of something really being far more powerful, far more dangerous than any run-of-the-mill drone that we may think about. So I don't know how you feel about that.
Well, so okay. I agree with you. I don't like it either. And I can also tell you that the ASRS people, they don't like doing it either. The reason that it's done that way is that the types of reports they're getting now, because they don't have UAP reports, they have just the regular safety reports. The type of information they're getting, they can't tell the difference between, if it's, most of the time they can't tell the difference if the pilot's talking about a UAP or a drone, or sometimes they're describing a UAP, what sounds like a UAP, but then they use the word drone somewhere. So since they don't have a UAP category in their database, because they don't have a specific form for that data to go just in that category, their solution was, well, we can't really, with most of these reports, we can't really prove that they're actually reporting UAP, although it sounds like they're reporting one. We're forced to just put everything in the drone pile for now. And they agree it's not the best solution, but you have to, part of the problem is, they have 3 people working in the office and they're getting thousands of reports a week. So those employees are sitting there and these reports are just flying in about everything you can imagine, from a runway light burnout at Chicago O'Hare to I almost crashed at LAX to I saw a bright light. So these people are sitting there just as fast as they can, reading these and going, that goes here, that goes here, this goes here, right? That's why it is the way it is. They're not happy about it. They wish they could do it different, as does everyone else. It's an outstanding question to allow me to bring that out and clarify that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, any questions? I got a couple more. But yeah, again, feel free to chime in. Cool. So So you were mentioning that like a lot of pilot reporting data and air traffic control kind of incident reports, like this Google Earth thing that you were talking about, where they were able to like triangulate an approximate position. Like to what extent, uh, like are these kind of projects that are there like kind of projects along those lines that doing that on like a larger scale that could feasibly be done like in some open source sense, or like maybe with, because I know like from a time perspective, like you guys are all, this is like a volunteer position that you guys are all kind of doing, or like what kind of like open source, how can the public get involved, and what kind of resources could the academic community help out such a,
Well, so the reason that we took specific interest in this was that it was a much more, in the aviation community, it was much more of a higher profile event. That if you listen to the ATC communications, the pilots were concerned about possibly hitting this thing, which is not frequently what you hear for most UAP aviator reports. And there were at least 2 crews that reported seeing it. So it's part of a kind of a validation idea. We had at least 2 observed crews. That's 4 individuals. Sure, the information's out there. The reason we did it was that, one, it has a lot of information in the air traffic control discussion. There's lots of talking about it back and forth. And if you know where to go to look on the internet, you can go find that conversation. So then once we knew what flights were involved, we are talking with one of the airlines right now because I have connections at one of the airlines from doing safety work with them in years gone, years ago. And we're talking with them right now about seeing if they'll let us interview their crew, the one airline, their crew, about it. So we can get more information than what was just talked about on the ATC frequency, because we think it would be a fascinating discussion. So that's the idea. So the first part of the answer is yes, there's places you can go. If you can get a nice big discussion on ATC, that's great. You find out which airplanes are involved, and you can build this little investigation. But the only reason we did that was so we have a really solid understanding of where they were, who they were. And then we were scratching our head one day and I was like, oh, you know what? That airline, I know people in that safety department. I'll call some friends. Let's see if, so they're still working that, greasing those wheels, trying to see if that crew wants to talk to us.
and what year was that incident from, or is that like a recent incident?
23, end of 23.
So it's still like still hot, or still
Yeah.
fresh off.
Yeah.
Cool. So we have one question in the chat. So I don't, how do new technologies, for example, Starlink or the Amazon Kuiper, how do they deal with safety? So is that a fair way of phrasing that question, Emre?
Well, so I have to admit, I guess being an old guy, passing 60 now, I'm not familiar with the Amazon product. I, of course, know what Starlink is. In fact, I was very disappointed. I've never had a UAP sighting until about 6 months ago in my backyard. I looked up and I saw a string of lights, and I was like, finally, I have a UAP sighting. This is awesome. And then 5 seconds later, I realized, damn, it's Starlink. That's what it is. So I didn't have a real UAP sighting, but I was so excited at first because I thought, finally, I've seen a UFO, and damn it, it was Starlink. But anyways, I'm not familiar with what's Amazon Kuiper?
Here,
Someone
I'm
tell me what that is.
not sure what that is.
Yeah, I don't know either.
Yeah, feel free to
Well,
clarify your question in the chat, maybe. But
well, so I guess anyways, the
I saw, not this is a silly story, but yeah, I saw a balloon a couple weeks ago, and it really looked like a UFO for a second or two. So yeah, but
yeah, so you're in the same shoes, right? Yeah, exactly. Still never seen a tornado either. That's still on my list as well. I've come close, but so what we don't know, this is something that Rex would definitely know far more about than myself, is what would have to, the way to answer that question is, would those systems be able to provide something better than what air traffic control radar, which is basically the only system that we have countrywide that could pick up anything that's airborne? Now, certainly Rex talked about all the great, toys and devices and, well, toys sounds like I'm trivializing. I'm certainly not trivializing. Some very advanced hardware, but that's, those devices are not nationwide, right? So the answer to the question is, you would have to think, I'm not sure how these would really be helpful. Now, one of the things that we hear fairly consistently with UAP reports, and I'm sure you guys are aware of this, is that airmen will see these things and ask air traffic control, do you have traffic at 2 o'clock about 10 miles, 20 miles, or whatever? And ATC will say no. So they're not, getting anything on their radar. So then that makes me wonder, to answer this question is, would those be able to do something like that? I couldn't imagine Starlink would do that. I mean, Starlink shouldn't have any capability to be able to do that. I don't know if the other thing, whatever that is, would that be able to back up our antiquated radar system that sometimes can't even track airplanes? So if we had something like that that is better than our normal air traffic radar, that would be great. That would be able to pick up far more UAPs when our radar falls through and they say, I don't see anything on my radar out there. That would be great if we had technology that someone would be able to say, we captured it on this device.
so I think in the chat.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw it. I mean, I know what Starlink is, right? It's Wi-Fi, but I don't know how. I mean, I don't think Wi-Fi is going to do anything to be able to help this, but
Cool. So another question is, so I guess technology is getting better nowadays. There could be like augmented reality displays, like kind of voice recording and eye tracking, all sorts of like, because I know in like when Ryan was talking about like the data that comes off a fighter jet, they have all these like different camera systems, like looking at stuff and different sensor systems. Um, as well as like some pretty complicated augmented reality displays. But that's, fancy military technology. Is there anything analogous in the civilian realm that's being rolled out, like maybe like cameras on planes or anything like that might be able to help and that you can use for data?
the only thing that I could think about is, and it would be, I just don't see how it would work in this application, but it does exist. There are some business jets, and it may be even some of the newer airplanes, like the Boeing 787, but don't hold me to that one. But I know for sure, because I've seen it work, and I've seen it in simulators, and I've seen it videos of it on YouTube in real life, being used on approaches. Have like night vision goggle visibility device on the nose of the airplane. So you're shooting the approach and nighttime. The one that's out there is remarkable. It's shooting an approach into Aspen, Colorado, which is actually a very, very tricky approach because you're just surrounded by mountains. And on the left-hand side of the picture, it's just a black, there's just black with this little white dot out there, which is the runway. But on the right-hand side, it shows looking out through this infrared device, and it looks like daytime out there, basically. And you can see everything, the mountains, the runway, the cars. So, that's a device that would be able to, but that's not something that pilots, I believe, can turn on and point their aircraft and be able to use it in that fashion. As far as all of the other stuff that you're talking about, that Ryan talked about, I mean, obviously this is all military grade hardware, and these are devices that are part of the reason why these airplanes are so expensive, right? To put these on civilian aircraft, the biggest question is, why would an airline even pay for that? Right? I mean, they already worry about, should we have 1, 2, or 3 coffee makers? That's serious. I mean, that's actually a serious. I've been with them when they make purchases. Sometimes they'll say, let's not get a third coffee maker because it saves money, but it also saves fuel expense because the whole coffee maker thing weighs 25 pounds, and that makes the airplane a little lighter. And over time, that saves fuel money. I mean, 25 pounds, they actually figure that in when they buy airplanes. So one, they're not going to spend an extra, I don't know what it'd even be, $150,000, $200,000 to put some of this type of hardware like they have in military jets on the airplanes, and the additional weight. You're not going to see that on civilian aircraft. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, they're like not even putting snacks on airplanes anymore. So
Exactly. Peanuts must weigh too much or something. But they cut out all types of safety things. I mean, when they buy these airplanes from Boeing and Airbus, there's a whole list of features that are not on the airplane that it's like a buffet. They can pick and choose. And some of them are safety features that they're not required to put on the airplanes, but they can if they want to. So they might be like, well, we like that, we'll buy that, but we're not buying these 10 safety features. So yeah, it's not going to happen.
let's see. Yeah, feel free to, raise your hand either in person or virtually. There's like a little button. So how have you guys been working with like AARO, like the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office? So to what extent are they kind of collecting this sort of soft pilot data, or to what extent are they like, do they have access to better servers and better repositories of data or anything like that? Or are they collaborative? And has that been like a useful avenue so far? Like, and to what extent?
Not for us. I know Ryan has, through his group, has talked to them. But our group, the AIAA, no is the answer. And I believe that the relationship has been difficult, but I don't want to speak for Ryan. But I know that he's had a lot of discussions with them. I know he's gone to Washington many times. And I think, gosh, I don't even want to speculate. I believe there's interest. But I don't know exactly. Let me put it this way. In the times that we've talked to Ryan in like senior staff meetings, it's never come up that we have potential access to their database. That's never even come up in a conversation. We never had a conversation that's even gone that direction. It's just never come up. So if that was a possibility, I think Ryan would have said something to us about that.
See. Are you aware of any efforts that they're like internally even collecting this data? Not necessarily that you're able to access it, but do you have any like kind of inside knowledge on that sense?
I do not have inside knowledge on that. And that's not like trying to hide something. I just actually don't know. again, it's just not something that I look into. We're doing our own thing. We're writing some papers. We're doing this research project where we have all these interviews. We're trying to bring that project together. We have a couple other projects going, and we're talking to ASRS a lot. We're talking to MITRE about maybe another study with some of these interviews. And like you said, we're a volunteer group. There's 6 of us. Everyone already works 50 plus hours a week. So we're trying to manage all of that. I think eventually, if we can go out, and I do want us to look at some other forms, but the ASAP forms and the ASRS forms, those are the ones that have been used in aviation safety for a very long time and have worked very, very well. I think that should be our starting point, and that's why we started with those. It doesn't, so now how do we make changes, the unique changes for UAPs? And we're going to have to, we have our own ideas that we talked about here, but eventually we need to look at some other ones because I'm sure there's some things we missed, but we haven't done it yet.
Yeah, so there's like clearly a lot of work to be done, and people are kind of stretched thin, institutions and personal. So if you had like a wish list of like what, kind of the lowest hanging fruit that you would wish for, either maybe like from like labor as interns or from what databases that you could access, like are there kind of things that you would like a wish list that your organization would have as far as like this event reporting side more broadly?
Well, yeah, so big scale, large scale would be definitely the a reporting system in place. Sure. I mean, that's the number one, a central reporting place. And I really believe, as do many others, that ASRS is the place. It's already set up to do this. The form is already about 3/4 of about what we want. They're very good at collecting large amounts of data. They're very good at analyzing data. They're very aware of the UAP problem. They know the FAA is aware of it. They've had meetings about UAPs. The FAA has told ASRS, hey, we're worried about UAPs. That's probably the place to go. That's probably my number one wish. And then locally within our group, the number one wish would be for us to be able to really get started with our study with all the data we collected and start going through it, and to be able to finish that research and get it written up. So that's big scale and small scale.
Great. We have a question in the chat from Kristen from Washington. So coming from a place of advocacy, is there specific information about air safety that we can bring to our senators and representatives to help get their attention and highlight how important the UAP issue is to air traffic safety?
Well, it's a great question, Kristen. And Congress is aware. I mean, there are plenty of senators that are aware of this. This is why the office of Shawn Kirkpatrick initially was leading, was created, and the Department of Defense is interested in this now, finally, right? I mean, these are groups that ignored this and just said, this is crazy. This stuff doesn't mean anything. The people who talk about this are nuts. And that's not the case now. So I don't have names of any specific senators. I know Ryan has gone to Washington because of his group, and it has made an impact, and he's testified in Congress for some of these things. But I don't have a list of specific senators. But I think it's already been done. That Now, on one additional thing to say about that is the current situation that we have in Washington. I'm not sure any senator at the moment would take time to entertain any further discussion about this because of all the other stuff that's going on with the Trump administration and Congress and some fighting between the two and just all of, I don't want this to be a political discussion, but trying to avoid that. Just all the stuff that's going on in Washington between Congress and Trump and Supreme Court and all these things. So there's obviously some big stuff going on. I'm not sure there's any senators right now that want to set aside any time and, at the moment.
Actually, on that front, there are some public hearings that are scheduled for just in a couple weeks. So I think
Oh, okay.
in, like there's like a kind of core of people in Congress that have been paying attention, especially with the JFK story as well. So they're going to have some public hearings soon. And I believe there are, to answer your question, or to give maybe some resources, like if maybe your idea was to like send letters to Congress or that sort of advocacy. There are a few organizations, like I believe Ryan's organization, Americans for Safe Aerospace, you can sign up. And there's like numerous other civilian action kind of organizations. We were just contacted by a group, Citizens for Disclosure. So there's also like the New Paradigm Institute, like UAP Disclosure Fund. Well, actually on our website, if you go to Yale UFO Society resources, we have like a bunch of resources, and there's a bunch of organizations that a lot of them you can sign up for and team up to send letters to Congress, and they'll give you like a form. So I think there are certain organizations that are advocating for the issue, and we have like some links to some of them in our website. I think some of them have slightly different missions and are kind of in conflict with each other on various, nitty-gritty details. So I guess to answer your question, there are organizations, and I think they're like kind of pre-built forms. You can send a letter. Thanks, Young Brinson. So yeah, that's like the UAP disclosure. That's the New Paradigm Institute. That's one website, and then there's also like a host of other resources. Let me just put the website in the chat. Maybe we have some resources.
And I just don't know how much impact. I mean, these would be great to look into, but I'm just not sure right now the level of impact these would have at the moment, because the awareness is definitely there. They know about this. They've been talking about this. There's been meetings and hearings. And in fact, I thought President Trump at one point had said, maybe this was pre-election, that he wanted materials released. Is that part of some of the hearings you were talking about with the JFK files about having some stuff released, UAP stuff? Because he said something about that a couple times.
Yeah, so there is some, like, a lot of motion, like kind of the same group of representatives. Like I think the one that I know who's working most on this is like Anna Paulina Luna, but there's also like Senator Chuck Schumer. It's like a pretty bipartisan group of people. They're both interested. Like Trump said, there was like a famous tweet from like 3 months ago where Trump tweeted that he's going to declassify all the JFK stuff, and then Chuck Schumer replied, "Now those." So
yeah.
And as far as like sending letters, like, I heard that, that actually works. Like if you like send a handwritten is better because they're like so flattered that you would take the time. So I'm not super, but sending letters is always like a good way to do things like that, advocate. But now is like kind of a crazy time. So your points are pretty valid.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's a coin toss. Maybe I'm too jaded after working with the government for 30 years on too many projects. Maybe there's some impact here. And it's great to try. Maybe everyone should try. Maybe I should try also. It might work. It'd be very interesting if some of these things or what Trump is promising, something or all, is released. I'm sure some of it will still be redacted, just like with the JFK stuff. But We'll have to see.
So we're kind of running a bit over time. Are there any kind of closing questions that anyone has, or take a few seconds? Feel free to unmute yourself. Young, or yeah, you just turn on your camera. Would you want
I was just gonna say, please, if anyone's in the Yale area, like if you're in the state that you reside in, to sign up for your local chapter of Citizens for Disclosure with New Paradigm Institute. I'm a Virginia State coordinator for New Paradigm for Citizens for Disclosure, along with my co-lead Anthony Miller. And we've been working to get the word out because we do have a major impact right now. Danny's at the UAP hackathon, and David Grush actually mentioned us in one of the tweets about how we're like a key volunteer group for NPI and for disclosure. So super cool. So I just encourage everyone to go on and sign up for the newsletter at least so that you get direct information from Danny Sheehan. And yeah, that's all I wanted to say. I mean, he's been at Yale before, obviously, but yeah, that's all I wanted to little plug in there.
Perfect. Well, there we go. There's part of the answer right there. Outstanding. I'm glad you're on.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, and
Yeah.
there's a shout out in the chat from the Pacific Northwest. So yeah, thanks to the whole Pacific Northwest, and especially Brian for the shout out. Cool. And I guess if there's no other questions, let me just do a last pass through.
How many folks do we have on? I can't seem to tell from.
I think we have like 12 total folks. So me, you, and the
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
maybe
Okay.
us. So yep. Yeah, thanks so much for everyone. Thanks for your advocacy, Young, and thanks so much for your talk, Shawn. That was really helpful as far as the types of.
Welcome.
It's great. I think this will be a great resource for people that are like interested. And please, yeah, support AIAA UAP, and you know, please, you know, give a hand to Shawn. And
Well, thank you very much for having me on. I appreciate it. It was exciting to get a chance to speak with a student organization about this, to see the enthusiasm from typically from a younger perspective, although not always, but it's nice to see that that balance from us, mostly older folks, from the next generation coming up. That's quite refreshing. So thank you for your attendance. I really appreciate it.
cool, thanks. So we can say like meeting adjourned then.
All right.